Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Event Safety and Security Skills Shop. My name is Demishi Pai, and I'm the Community Impact Coordinator for Tacoma Venues and Events, and I will be your host today. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping rules. This session will be recorded. All attendees will be muted during the skill shop. Please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. We will have time for questions at the end of the skill shop, and additional resources will be made available on the Tacoma Venue and Events website after the presentation. Joining us today, we have Frank Sebastian, Emergency Management Group, Lieutenant David Johnson, wave, hey. There he is. Tacoma Police Department, Sergeant Walter Miller, Tacoma Police Department, Tika Dagon, Chief Emergency Management Officer, Tacoma Fire Department, Ryan Schroeder, Regional Event Supervisor for Metro Parks Tacoma, Sean McBroom, Security Manager for the Tacoma Dome, and Ashley Young, Special Events Coordinator for Tacoma Venues and Events. As the Community Impact Coordinator, my role is to lead the engagement program. These skill shops are just one of the ways that Tacoma Venue and Events engages with the community. The intention behind the skill shops are to provide resources and strengthen event equity and access for our community event planners. These partnerships and programs are centered around TVE's values: safety first, legendary experiences, one crew built on trust, create and innovate, and inclusion matters. Tacoma Venues and Events manages the city of Tacoma venues, such as the Tacoma Dome, the Greater Tacoma Convention Center, Pantages, Rialto Theaters, Theater on the Square, Cheney Stadium, and is also includes the Department of Special Events. All right, to kick our skill shop off, we have Frank Sebastian. Go ahead, Frank.
Well, good morning, everybody. And thanks for inviting me to this. This looks like an exciting group of experts here to kind of present on various things, safety and security-wise, for special events. As mentioned, my name is Frank Sebastian. I'm the president of the Emergency Management Group of Washington, which is a nonprofit organization that assists community events, large and small, with emergency planning and response, safety, security, and similar things of that nature. A little bit of background: I spent 27 years with the federal government, both responding to disasters and emergency management, but also as part of the national security special events team for very large impact things, or for our emergency management colleagues here, the SEER 1 type events. Retired from that, been involved with Seafair for a number of years up in Seattle, as well as several other high-profile events, such as the Seahawks Super Bowl victory celebration, the planner for that, as well as the National Special Olympics games that were here in 2017, as well as other Special Olympic things that continue through this day. So today, we're going to talk briefly about the various phases of emergency management. And these are the similar phases that you'll see across emergency management, whether it's planning for catastrophic events in a community, state level, national level, or in the special events level. These all kind of fall into these standard topics. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about slightly about managing an emergency at a special event. We'll look at special event assessment and planning and some of the tools that are used for that, and then developing an emergency plan. So again, this is just kind of lifts the tent flap a little bit to look into that side, and certainly hopefully get thinking about how to present things and how to move forward with events in your community. So again, as mentioned, the 4 phases of emergency management are mitigation, preparedness or planning, response, and recovery. And again, this is a standard phase that is pretty much out there for anything that's happening. As we look into particularly the events community, We kind of sway that a little bit from what you'd see if you were responding to, say, a wildfire or an earthquake scenario, mass shooting, something of that nature. So number one priority is always life safety. Nothing comes before that. The next priority is property conservation. In other words, mitigate damage, prevent damage, and so forth. For the events community, you now get into reputational impact mitigation. Okay. And that's for an event that should have something adverse happen, something tragic happen. How well are they managing that, not only for their own organization, the promoter, but also potential sponsors and so forth. And that goes very deep. As you look at some of these big events, they all come with national branding sponsors, and they have a voice in that. One of the things we look at as a case study sometimes is in Reno, the national championship air races, which have went on for years and years and years until this year. In 2011, had a tragic event where an airplane went into the crowd. They had a number of fatalities, a number of injuries. And because of some very good planning and direction, they not only mitigated that, with taking care of the injured, but they were able to get their organization back on track and continue the following year. And that's an important piece. And that also kind of comes into the fourth phase is, can you recover your event? Can you continue your event? Or are you've done? And there's some, a lot of factors that come into that decision making of that. So as we look at mitigation, this phase focuses on reducing the impact of a disaster or an event before they occur. Risk management, proactive planning. Some of these include site planning, best practices, event planning, risk review, historical review, fire, building codes, land use planning, and public education, all to minimize risk. And if you put that in the context of a special event, say it's a concert or it's a fair, you're going to look at things like your traffic management plan, your access and egress plans, all of those, as well as looking at your crowd demographics. Is this a crowd that has been known to get a little bit rowdy? You're probably going to have some different challenges with that versus a group that, let's say, has a lot of special needs and maybe has a lot higher number of medical type events that occur. So all things that you look at in the planning, and that takes us, to the planning stage or preparedness stage. Those words kind of interchangeable, which is how do we plan to handle those things? And again, it's always fun being the planner because you get to think of what could go wrong here. And when you're working with the event producers, they want to have an exciting and fun event for everybody. They don't want to talk to the guy from emergency management or the risk manager about, well, what happens if this happens? What happens if we have a thunderstorm and it's an outdoor event? Those kind of things. But that's so important that you think about that preparedness and then how to mitigate those. Do you have the right training for your staff? Do you have an emergency plan that's been socialized and trained and planned? Have you conducted a drill? Again, I reflect back to the incident in Reno a number of years ago. One of the reasons that was so successful in saving lives and mitigating damage and so forth is they had conducted a full-scale exercise about 4 months before the incident. And it was the same scenario. That had never happened at an air show in North America until that. But their planners and their exercise put it together and said, what if? And they looked at everything from traffic management to medical triage and so forth. And then looking at communication strategies. When I say communication strategies, that's both internal. How do you communicate with the chain of command? It's external with partners and stakeholders, such as your law enforcement and your fire communities, as well as your public messaging. And then, as you'll see coming up here, do you have the right supplies on hand? Do you have first aid supplies? If you're in a situation where you may be doing sheltering in place for a protracted period of time, do you have supplies for that? The next phase, third phase, is response. And the response phase is what happens during and immediately after an emergency. It's your public notification. And that's probably needs to be high up on your list, particularly today with social media and communication, getting the right information out ahead of time, because people look at that even when they're at an event, as you well know. They're looking at their phones, they're looking at their screens to see what's going on. So great way to push out that information, particularly if you're going to do sheltering or you're going to have to do an evacuation or something. It's how well you're going to do your search and rescue, your things of that nature, and then providing medical care. If there's individuals, and this goes from, we always think about catastrophic. What do we do if we, have a shooter? What do we do if we have something of that nature? But what about just people out in a hot environment? I can tell you, I was working an event in Eastern Washington in August, and we had a very high number of dehydration and heat related injuries from the attendees and crowd. Luckily, that event organizer had prepared for that, and they had cooling stations, they had plenty of hydration, things of that nature. And as we kind of pivoted to continued days to increase the public messaging, stay hydrated, drink water, those types of things. And then there's recovery, and as we mentioned, that is basically going back to status quo. This phase focuses on restoring the affected area to its pre-disaster state. For an event, that could be your continuation. In a venue, that's getting that venue back to operation. If you, take one here, you damage a stadium, you damage something like that, how soon can that be back in operational? And then starting to look at the emotional and physical recovery of people that are involved in this. That includes your staff, your volunteers, your attendees. And then again, common thread is that the event can continue. Either if not immediately, it can continue in subsequent years or subsequent periods of time. So again, those are the phases. How does this all apply in the special events world? Well, in mitigation, you're going to identify those potential risks with the event, such as crowd control, weather, security threats, and implement measures to reduce that risk. And the slide's coming up here, just kind of on a risk matrix that you may want to use. And that can be things like setting up barriers, making sure there's proper signage, things that exit pathways are marked. Preparedness, develop an action plan specific to your event. What if this happens? What do we do? Train your staff, train your volunteers, conduct a drill. Ensure that communication's in place. And I always like to put this out, don't rely on cell phones for communication. We all know what happens when you have a large mass of people in an area and they'll get on their phone for whatever reason. So look at two-way radios, look at other systems that can work. Stockpile necessary supplies, first aid kits, water, emergency contact lists, those types of things. During the response, be able to react quickly. That could involve evacuating the venue if it's safe to do so, providing medical assistance to ill or injured, cooperating with the local emergency services. Local emergency services are your partner. That needs to happen at a planning stage too. Something we always very, very much, push to event organizers is, your first contact is planning your event. Your second one is talking to your police and your fire and your local emergency management folks. And then recovery, as I mentioned, how fast can you start and becoming effective in getting things back to status quo? Just some examples here. If you're looking at a large concert, ensuring stage and equipment are secure. There's clear paths of exits. We know historically where there's been injuries at a concert where a speaker tower fell over that was left unsecured. That's a mitigation issue. There should be weather factors and wind factors for tent stages. Train your staff. I can't overemphasize that. Set up a command center so people know who's in charge, how that word is going to get out. Have medical teams on standby if needed. That's your response phase. Clear communication, and then recovery. Evaluate how well things happen. One of the best things in recovery is an after action review. Make necessary adjustments for the future. Some pitfalls to avoid and things that don't go so well when you're managing an event is the lack of clear communication. So you want to mitigate that by making sure that all volunteers know the procedures, know communication, know who's in charge, how to communicate up and down the chain of command. Believe me, rumor mills develop every time even something little happens. You want to be able to get that clear message out, make sure there's not mismessages or delayed or malinformation. Training. Make sure you're training your staff. Make sure your contractors that you're using are appropriately trained. Basically, don't assume that everyone knows what to do in an emergency. That includes some of your contract personnel that you may bring in. Outdated emergency plans. Emergency plan is dynamic. It's a living, breathing document. Make sure those are up to date as things change. We see in some venues where in public safety, due to staffing and budgets and whatever, there's not as many resources available as there was 5 years ago. So making sure you're adjusting for that as an event organizer, you may have to pick up some of that tasking that was previously. Don't forget about minor incidences. Don't ignore those things. Sometimes a minor problem can become a major problem when you can take care of it immediately. Having poor coordination with local authorities. Make sure that, as I mentioned, that you have a strong relationship with your police, your fire, your emergency services. Walkthroughs. This is a two-way communication that your emergency services should know what's going on at the event. They need to know what resources you have at your event. Likewise, you need to know what community resources can come and help you. Having inadequate resources, again, not having the right stuff, whether that's people, that's things, making sure that you plan for the emergency. And then failure to counter rumors. You don't want false information. You don't want misinformation out there that can lead to panic and confusion. In our crowd manager class, we actually talk about an event that happened where a number of people were killed because somebody mistook something at an event and there was a bunch of people trampled when there was no emergency in the front end there to cause that. Resource allocation. How does the event organizer manage those resources? Something as an emergency manager, and I talk to event executive directors and producers, and they always go, well, security and safety and medical doesn't bring money in. Well, yes, it does. You need to allocate money to that, and staffing and training. Make sure you've got the right staff, that they're trained, they can provide those services. And whether they're paid or they're volunteer, just making sure they're adequate. Communication systems. Invest in good communication, whether you're renting two-way radios or you have on-site radios or you have another means. There's a lot of technology now that's out there that doesn't rely on the cell networks. Stockpiling medical supplies. And something we always recommend is having, your jump bags or your first aid kits that your on-site medical is using, and then have your MCI or mass casualty event bags that are there that can have additional things that may be needed. Security measures. And again, ramp that up, ramp that down based on threats, based on crowd dynamics and so forth. Crowd control barriers, or those meridian barriers, are great to keep things that are, they're expensive, but they're well worthwhile, particularly if you're doing parades or things like that. And again, your local law enforcement's a great source to look at that. Develop evacuation plans and test them. Look at emergency sheltering and safe zones. If you got an outdoor event in a park and there's no buildings to go into, and you're in the summertime and there's potential lightning, think about that. Where would you put those people if your lightning is within, short distance away? Indoor sites, think about backup power and lighting. Is there adequate emergency lighting? Is there backup power? Should there be a power outage? Number one emergency up in our, the Northwest here is power outages, particularly in the wintertime. And again, establish that strong relationship with your local authorities. So why have an emergency plan? Well, it goes without saying. It reduces risk. It makes your event work. And the emergency plan should include some pretty much key elements. And again, it's a document. It's not overly complex. In fact, you don't want to make it overly complex because you don't want people following the plan and losing sight of the ability to manage that particular emergency. But those things should identify, just as we've talked today about risk assessment. What are those potential threats? What do they look like? Communication, how do people communicate? The response plan, who does what agency, what individuals? And then the recovery plan back to normalcy. So on the screen now, I've got the risk management matrix should be coming up here in the next slide. And it basically shows, that slide must not be in here. There it is. So you may have seen this. This basically shows, things over on the lower right are things that have negligible impact on the event. and are improbable are no factors. As they come up and they start happening, they go from green to yellow. And of course, on the left side, you have, those catastrophic events, but you don't ever want them to happen. And if they do look like they're a frequent, occasional or remote chance, that's probably a show stop at that point. So again, things to look at if you can mitigate in that efforts. A term that you'll hear, and particularly hear from our colleagues from public safety that are on the line here, is unified command. And that's something that's utilized in public safety, but it's also used in the private sector and the corporate world and in a lot of special events. And it basically is just partnership for leadership. In other words, no one loses their authority. No one changes anything. It's just you go into where everybody's agreed that for different things, who will be in charge, and it becomes one team versus a bunch of silos. All hazards planning and response, just some topics. This is kind of a thing just to think about those things that you may see. And that's things such as access and egress movement, what's crowd densities, medical emergencies, fire hazards, permanent and temporary structure systems, severe weather. One more slide, actually. Earthquakes, civil and other disturbances, terrorism events, all those things. If you need to think about those things, have those incorporated in your plan, do a what if. You hear the term mass gathering. That's kind of a federal term. That just means an event with a whole lot of people. And they can be a short-term event that only lasts a couple hours. They can be a long-term event that goes on for days or even weeks. All totally different. You may have 250 spectators. You may have 100,000 spectators. The plan is the same. It's just the scalability and the size that changes. Some of those high acuity things that can happen, mass shootings, vehicle rammings, explosive devices, sabotage, civil unrest, extremism. In today's world, we have to think about all those. And, we look sometimes at things that have happened at other events, and probably everything that's up there has happened at a special event somewhere. One of the great tools out there, and this is something that you see at stadiums, you see it at airports, you see it at special events, it's see something, say something. That's a Homeland Security program, but it just means reporting things. Make sure that that's out there. If you see something that's unusual, let's put that forward. Give them a phone number to call, whether it's your event command center, whether it's 911, work that out ahead of time. Safety is everybody's responsibility, and knowing how to put those reports in. As you develop your plan, keep it simple. I've seen some plans that get way down in the weeds. Other plans, kind of point you in the right direction and address things, but don't get overly complex. The planning process, in my opinion, is equal to the plan itself. Going through the planning process will get you to think about these things. Emergencies don't follow a script. Your plan shouldn't either. And the best data elements make the best decision, and rapid data elements for rapid decisions. Those are two things you want to do. You don't want your incident commander, your event leader to be able to make good decisions and rapidly. So get that good information out there. From a planning consideration, think about what is the trigger point. If winds get to 30 miles an hour, if temperatures get to 30, do these things. Communication. How do we communicate, not just internally, but across the board? How do we talk to our partners, our stakeholders? Public communications. How are we getting messaging out to our crowd, to anyone who has knowledge of this? What's the chain of command? Following. Everyone should know who their supervisor is. And don't make the event director the absolute leader of everything. They should be talking to, no more than about 5 subordinates. And just making sure everyone has the right knowledge and information. If you've ever been to a game at Husky Stadium, they produce a little pocketbook up there that talks about emergencies. It also has pictures of all the VIPs in it. So if you see the athletic director, you know who they are, those kind of things. And that goes to every volunteer and every employee that's working at a Husky game. So it's that knowledge and information piece. Plans can be scalable. Bigger the event, bigger the plan, more acuity. unity of command. And again, that making sure that everyone who's making decisions, both internal and external, are thinking about the same goals and objectives. Have contingency plans. Think about external affairs. That's again a federal term, but that's your public relations piece. This is just kind of a quick diagram here, just a plan, and then how you can have annexes to those plans. So you have the main emergency plan, and then you have an active shooter annex, severe weather, again, following those, just a guideline. Here's some tools. This is something that's used in FEMA. You can pick this up off their website. At least I think you still can. This is something that's for NSSEs that's used, but it's a checklist. If this happens, who has responsibility? You see the alphabet soup of agencies here. Use something like this for your local. Here's just some other tools. This is an event planning checklist, again, from FEMA. They now have, CISA has the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, part of Homeland Security, has a nice online tool. It asks you a bunch of questions, and through AI, it types you out a pretty good little plan. And then this is from Seattle, and this looks an awful lot like the Tacoma plan. But this is, one of the better checklists that's out there. If you answer all, the blocks in here, you've got your plan. This is just an example here of what a plan could look like. This is for the USA Games for Special Olympics. As you can see, this was, 40 pages long, and a lot of this was see the plan that already exists. We're at University of Washington. They have a earthquake plan, so we don't write one. We say see theirs. So this is kind of what these look like. Some other ones that are out there. This is one which was done for the Seahawks welcome celebration, and then an instant action plan for Special Olympic fall games that happened here in Pierce County last year. And before anybody says anything, don't beat me up about this. If you look at this date here, that is the correct date for this plan. We were asked to assist the city with planning and response for the 2014 plan that occurred. And we had 3 days to do that. And luckily it happened. It was a great event, safe event. We had no baseline. Next year, we had 2 weeks to plan because we had to get through the playoffs. And then we're looking at that. So we developed a plan. We fixed everything that, we wish we would have had the year before. And we all know what happened there. So that plan sits on a shelf somewhere. Hopefully it'll come out again someday. And that is kind of it. Something I like to say, I never like the thing about final thoughts because I want to do this again. It's not going to be my last time. So kind of my closing thoughts are success through synergy. None of us are as smart as all of us are collectively. Let's work to make all of our events safe, secure, and that people go home in the same condition they get here in. And with that, I will send it back to the next presenter.
Thank you so much, Frank. Now we have Lieutenant Johnson and Sergeant Miller.
Hi there, I'm Dave Johnson with the Tacoma Police Department. I've been here 26 years. I'm currently the lieutenant for the Special Events Program, and I'll turn it over to Sergeant Miller.
I'm Sergeant Miller. I've been with Tacoma for about 15 years. I am a patrol sergeant by day and then special events sergeant as a side gig with Sergeant Mills, who's the full-time special events sergeant. I also work with our incident management team here at the department, which gives me a lot of emergency management contacts throughout the city with other organizations. So with that, we'll get started here. Safety and security requirements. What is required if an event is in the right-of-way? Examples are street fairs, festivals, parades, runs, walks. So for the police department, safety is our number one goal. It does depend on how many people are going to attend these events. If you have 200 people and you're going to be in the street, we want that to be as safe as possible. If you're going to have 4,000, 5,000 people in the street, we also want that to be safe as well. So depends on how large the event is going to be. Earlier you mentioned meridian barriers. Those are barriers that go in the street in the right of way, where your event may be required to have those, if we look at the scale of the event. And that is just an anti-vehicle barrier where we don't want any cars. It doesn't mean that somebody's trying to do harm. There could be accidents too, where a confused driver doesn't know where they're going and they could end up in your footprint of your event, if it's in the street. And we don't want that to happen, and we want to be safe. So the meridians could be used. We could use ecology blocks, something that's not going to move and it's going to be in place the entire time. So that way, when people are gathering in your set footprint, then we're going to make sure they're safe and nothing's going to happen to them. Let's see, those are the anti-vehicle barriers. Officers with or without vehicles at intersections. So intersections that are on main thoroughfares, we would have an officer there with a marked patrol car, lights on, very visible, signaling to cars that are coming, hey, you can't go this way. You have to turn off this main thoroughfare. So if it's if you guys know the city, if it's Pacific Avenue, McKinley Avenue, any of the big main streets, then we're going to have officers blocking the intersections with their lights on. So that way we can mitigate the traffic coming through your event. Certified flaggers in heavy pedestrian pathways, that's also a good option. You can subcontract and have certified flaggers to also help with traffic control. Then you would not need to use an officer in that particular area. And that would help mitigate the traffic flow, because sometimes people don't see signs or ignore signs and they'll end up right in your way. So certified flaggers are also a good way to supplement police. When is TPD required for an indoor event or an outdoor event? As far as requirements go, it does depend on the scale of the event. So indoor event, right away, I think about the Tacoma Dome. Obviously, we work at the Tacoma Dome a lot. There are events that have hundreds of people and there are events that have thousands of people. So that is going to be dependent upon how large of an event this has. And the next question gets into alcohol too, so we'll talk about that. Outdoor events, you may have an outdoor event where you don't need police and it's not required. Say it's a small block party and it's just on a small street right in front of your house, and you actually did get a permit through the permit process and you're just right in front of your house, one block. You might not be required to have police if you say, hey, it's just me and my neighbors and maybe 50 people. That's a lot different than, for an example, what we just had, the Halloween parade on McKinley. There were probably 5,000 people there. So you're going to have officers there for safety, security, and to make sure the event goes safe. If you have any questions about that, always feel free to reach out to us and ask, is this required? Is it not required? Or what are your suggestions? So always ask. Next one, if your event has alcohol, what are the requirements? Just because you have alcohol at your event doesn't mean you are required to have police. It may mean you want to, just because there's a little different dynamic with crowds if you have a beer garden, or if there's going to be drinking at your event. Obviously, you'll want to have somebody checking IDs and make sure your beer garden is secure. And then you might want to have an extra, couple members from the police department walking around just to make sure that the crowd is being safe and not getting out of hand with their alcohol use. How does an event hire off-duty officers? So you would contact the police department. Sergeant Jason Mills would probably be your first contact, and you could ask him, hey, is this off-duty? Is this city overtime? If you're planning an event, more than likely it'll be off-duty officers. And what that means is you will still get an officer that is in uniform, and you could still have a patrol car that's doing your traffic control. However, you would be paying that officer at off-duty 1099, and that means they're employed by you. So you would pay them, not the police department, you would pay the officer. Next slide. Crowd control measures. Can an event hire outside security? What should they look for? The answer is yes, you can have outside security. So an example, again, the event we just had, the Halloween parade, police were there and worked and maintained the outer perimeter to keep the footprint secure. They did hire off-duty security, and they were actually walking around on the inside of the footprint on this outdoor event, just to make sure that the crowd was safe. There was no alcohol drinking there, but the event organizer did want to have security as well as law enforcement there. So you can, and they can help supplement walking around your event to make sure everything is safe. What measures should a safety plan include for your emergency response? So as far as safety goes and your safety plan, there are multiple things that you should think about. If you have a large event and you have a missing child, you might want to have a designated area where somebody can go and report to that area for lost and found or a missing person, or a center hub that they can get a hold of somebody that's working the event. Hey, I need to talk to police, and they can use their radio and get a hold of us. Instead of calling 911, which you can always do, but we are already there. So if somebody can get a hold of us fast, then we will be there to help mitigate any problems that arise from that. If we're on scene and we need more Tacoma Police response to this event, obviously we have our radios on us. We can call for more units immediately if there's a fight or if something is getting out of control. You would have TPD there on scene already, and if we need more, then we can get them there. Or if we need fire, we're directly linked with the fire department, so we can immediately call for them to come to your event too. So those are some safety things that you can just kind of plan ahead to make sure if something were to happen, then you're prepared for it. Next slide.
So I'll chime in at this point. Nice job, Wally. The Tacoma Police Department and the Fusion Center, what our interaction is. The Fusion Center is a statewide intel center that our department, Tacoma Police Department, Pierce County, work with on a regular, actually daily basis. However, that would be our intel detective that is working with the intel, with the Fusion Center. And essentially with that, they look ahead, they look for protests. If we were to have any issues forthcoming, that would give us intel. We have city council meetings that they keep an eye on for protesters that are having issues with those folks. So overall, they are once again the statewide intel center that we work with, and we try to forecast things that might be coming down the pipe. And with that, there's not too much more that I can talk about. And questions and answers at the end, I can do my best for specific questions.
Well, thank you so much, Lieutenant David Johnson and Sergeant Walter Miller. I do appreciate you being here and for your presentation. Next up, we have Tika Dayagun.
Morning. Is it still morning? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. All right. I'm Tika Dayagun. I'm the Chief Emergency Manager for the city of Tacoma, but my position is within the fire department. So I get kind of the best of both worlds, I'd like to say. We can go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk about a few things. Event emergency response. So make sure you have evacuation procedures, especially as mentioned, if you have an outdoor event or whatever facility that you're using, make sure you know where those exits are and what the evacuation plan is going to be. Make sure you know how to use a fire extinguisher. If you don't, let us know. We will teach you how to use a fire extinguisher, largely because a lot of times you can put out a fire using a fire extinguisher if it hasn't gotten to a size that's beyond manageable. So that's a really good knowledge to have. I know how to do it in my house. So everyone we can teach, we will come out and teach you. Shelter in place. Sometimes you may be required to, especially if something is going on outside. If there is a call for a shelter in place, largely we will send an emergency alert to tell you, stay where you are, do not leave. That means make sure you're adhering to those rules. Don't open the doors, don't leave the facility, stay where you're at until we say it's safe to do so, to leave the location, which usually is a call made by law enforcement if we have to shut down a facility due to an event happening outside. Occupancy, make sure you adhere to occupancy rules. If there's too many people, you're going to get trampled trying to leave. People can start to get suffocated. You've seen events where people start to suffocate because there's too many people crammed in a room. It causes more injury than it does excitement. That's what I like to say. If you have too many people in a room, it sounds cool, it looks great, but be mindful that it can make it harder for people to evacuate, and it can make it harder for us, the responders, I should say, to get into that area to help bring any kind of support to the incident. There are different response levels, right? So if you call out for someone who's having a hard time breathing, you're not going to get a bunch of engines and medic units. So be mindful that based on what's happening, the response level might be different. You might get us coming out, you might get us and TPD, and sometimes we can't respond until TPD clears the scene. So that's something to consider in your planning, is what those different response levels would look like. And that's just sitting down and chatting with whoever is going to be the battalion chief or the IC in charge for at the command post there. So we also do CERT. CERT is a community emergency response team. So on the emergency management for the city, we're a team of 3. So there's myself and 2 emergency management analysts. Ariana is our CERT program manager, amongst all the other things that she is, because we all wear many different hats. But CERT is our community emergency response team, and we train them on basic first aid, right? How can they help support until responders arrive? Search and rescue and fire suppression. Another thing we teach them on is actually traffic control. So we've started talking with Public Works to see how we could incorporate them in some of the larger events, especially like the 4th of July blast, because we get a lot of people at those events, and our ability to sometimes expand those numbers for people to support traffic control is, it's hit or miss sometimes. I think we all have to pull a lot of teeth to make sure we have some of the resources there. So we're working hand in hand to try to get them trained on traffic control to help guide people where they should go, roads that are closed and such, and so on. I think this is the only slide that I have. So I'm going to transition and put on my emergency manager hat. So we at the city of Tacoma have emergency alert and warning for the city. We don't only do emergency alerts, we can do event alerting. So what that would entitle would be that you contact me, and my team and I would set up a meeting with you to talk about what your event is and how people can sign up just to get alerts for that event. So as mentioned by Frank earlier, weather, what's coming up with the weather, things that they may want to know that would be impactful for the event, considerations, we can set all of that up so that people who are attending those events get alerts just for that event. I'll use a good example is I had a murder mystery party, and we used a little demo of it for my murder mystery party to tell people when it was starting, when it was time to sit down, now to move on to refreshments. And that was just me being really crazy as a party planner, but we can use it just for that. Be mindful to hydrate. The weather's going to be hot, it's going to rain, it's going to be windy. Prepare for those weather changes. And then if there is an incident at the event, we just hit a button and that emergency alert would blast out with instructions on what to do. We've had a lot of conversations. So I've been in my position for 3 years. So my predecessor moved to Germany. And so we've had a lot of conversations with Tacoma Fire about having us at the incident command post for larger events. That way we're sitting there and we already do the work of developing IAPs and stuff like that for other events that we have, especially like high profile trial incidents or election planning. So we are already in the process of developing IAPs. It's our job. So we can come out and help with some of that emergency planning. We can come out and support the emergency alerting or any alerting that we need to go out in real time versus the lag time between having the responders, something happen, and then the responders reaching out to us to provide that alerting. So it's free to all of you, right? Because it's our job to provide that, but you would just need to reach out directly to me, and my team and I would sit down with you and kind of go over the parameters and make sure that we iron out some messaging. And if you would like to have us at the command post to help support that. So we also have reunification zones in the city, places that we've partnered with to be reunification hubs. So you as the event organizer don't have to recreate the wheel with that, right? We've already identified those locations and we can have them on standby to support if something happens. So we know that in large scale events, one thing that happens is what everybody's looking for everyone. And how can you make sure that they're connected to their family again? So we do a lot of that planning on the back end for ourselves. Even when it came to the 4th of July blast, that was one thing that we already had in our back pocket set up. If something were to happen, our reunification hubs would be there to help support reunifying people and their families. So that's just a short list of all the things that we do, but you can feel free to reach out to us anytime. And we are more than happy to support and be a resource to you for your event. And that's all from me for Tacoma Fire.
Thank you, Tika. That was amazing. I definitely learned some things that I didn't know, and I'll be contacting you for my own personal reasons. So thank you. Now we have Ryan Schroeder with Metro Parks Tacoma.
Hi, Ryan Schroeder, Metro Parks Tacoma. Just some background. I am the end user of all of the services that everybody has talked about so far. I've been producing events for over 25 years now, from corporate radio events to concerts to Bye to Seattle, Taste of Tacoma, lots of other little events here and there. But now for Metro Parks, I focus on our 3 large events, which is the Flower and Garden Festival, Mosaic Festival at Wright Park, and then the Summer Blast event, which is the monopolizer of all of the city's resources for a day, with about 75,000 people in attendance. So it is the big one in town. I don't have a lot of slides, but we'll hit on all of these bullet points, and if there's anything later on, I'm happy to answer questions. The first thing here is on-the-ground communications. Frank kind of mentioned it earlier. So much of us rely on cell phones to communicate with one another, but I'm sure everybody's experienced either at a stadium event, football, concert, whatever that is, or a large-scale public event, that at some point the bandwidth on those cell towers drops down to nothing, where you can't even send a text message out or, unfortunately, post to Instagram. So that for smaller events that, are less than 5,000 people, cell phones work great. There's whether it's using a group text thread that you have different members on, and you can label them, and this one's for emergencies, this one's for I need more cups in the beer garden. All of those different groups are helpful. There's also Microsoft Teams has the ability to build that out. One of my executive directors for one of the nonprofits that I run is obsessed with WhatsApp now, and how she can build out different groups for different communication points. So cell phones work great for that. There is a loophole kind of to using cell phones at large scale events, and that's to use a thing called a COW. That's a cell phone tower on wheels. You have to work well in advance with all of the different carriers, and they bring in mobile cell phone towers to help boost signals in areas that see heavy use or that have poor coverage. That will kind of help. But me being an old school event producer, the tried and true way of communication on site is through two-way radios. There's a couple of places that you can rent them locally. If you don't own them, Bearcom, Day Wireless, those are the big players in the game. There are two different classes of two-way radios. There's the ones you can go buy on Amazon, which are family radio service. So those are those Motorola little ones that you can buy for $20. Those work. They are not secure, meaning that anybody can jump onto those frequencies. They can prevent you from communicating to one another. So what Day Wireless, Bearcom, they use a different type of radio that has distinct FCC licenses for each of the frequencies. They're secure, meaning that people can't jump on and interrupt the communications that you need. And in an emergency situation, seconds matter. So that's usually the best way to communicate, and the reason it's been around and the tried and true method for so long. There's a few things with radios to keep in mind. First of all, is training. Not everybody on your staff is going to know how to use a radio or radio protocol. So going through training with anybody on your staff who's going to be one of the holders of those radios is really important, and identifying like what different code words you're going to use, what code word to use for a medical emergency, for a fire, for civil unrest, those different things. A big one that we get is differentiating between a parent who has lost their kid versus a kid who can't find their parent. So how do you communicate those to your staff? And then identifying what things you will say over those radios. Lots of people have in-ears, other people just clip them to their belt and they're turned up really loud, or have a biscuit that we call them, the CB mics. So like, what details about the child are you willing to share that you feel safe and comfortable with, knowing that just about anybody in the vicinity of one of those radios is going to hear it. So making sure that you're keeping all of those things in mind when it comes to that. The dealing with the public places. So most of our festivals and events that happen in and around Tacoma are outdoor public festivals, events, those types of things, usually in a non-gated environment. These are the hardest events to secure, knowing that you have a very porous perimeter. You can't control who comes in or out or what comes in and out most of the time. So keeping an eye and coming up with a plan on how you're going to monitor those perimeters, the traffic control plans with the meridian barriers, the crash barriers, all those different types of things, everything that has been mentioned previously. One thing that often gets overlooked is what you're doing to secure that event space on your set and strike days. And a big thing to consider with an ungated event, and even the day of the event, your event is advertised at noon, but the public starts showing up at 10. So what are those safety things that you need to consider during setting and striking? Are there forklifts being moved around? Are there cable ramps laid down for your temporary power? Is there signage around your cable ramps? Taste of Tacoma one year, a cyclist launched himself off of one of our cable ramps. And the only thing that saved us from a very big lawsuit was a sign that was posted on either side that said cable crossing ahead. So those different types of things to think about when you're dealing with an environment that you don't fully control and you can't control who's coming in or out. All big things. Overnight security is another one that often people overlook. So, how are you securing those assets when nobody else is there and you've gone home to get your 2 hours of sleep before the event starts or before you do it all again the next day? So making sure that you have adequate coverage for that overnight. And then signage is another big portion to consider when doing an outdoor public event. So like I said, curb ramps show boundary markers. Does your control of the event end, and where are the public at their own risk, or where should they not enter? We also use video notice signs for photography. So knowing that if you enter this space, you will be photographed, you will be videoed, and we're going to use that to promote the event in the future. Also, right to eject signs. As the permit holder and event producer, you control that space. And while there are certain First Amendment things that you have to consider, if you post that you have the right to eject unruly, unreasonable, disruptive people, it helps. You're not always going to get them to leave, but at least you have some ground to stand on there. So really think about what your signage plan looks like in that space. Next is collaborating with local authorities. All of these people who have spoken so far are the people you should be talking to early and often. It is not a good idea to plan a event for 10,000 people and 2 weeks before go, oh, we should have police at this. Everybody is short-staffed now. There is an oversaturation of events right now. So keeping in mind that your timeline for producing this event is really important. Don't ever mention your event to the public until you've gotten the sign off from everybody. So that's, whether it's permits from the city of Tacoma, which is separate from the permits for Metro Parks, And then, health department sign off, do all of your food vendors meet all of that stuff? Do they have the right permits so that, they're adhering to the right rules and regulations so you're not getting anybody sick at your event? Tacoma Fire Department, Tacoma Police Department, all of these are the steps on the way before you should be announcing your event to the public, and getting people to come down. So really think about all of those different players, and all of us are here to answer those questions along the way. So if there's something you're unsure of, everybody is very helpful, and everybody just wants to make sure that events are safe and that nobody's getting hurt. And so everybody's willing to help out along the way. Another thing, just in there as part of that is that hasn't been mentioned, they'll stick in there, is insurance. Make sure that your event is insured. It protects you, protects the public, and insurance is getting harder to find. So make sure that that's something that you look at very early, and then budget for it as well. Communicating with your staff and volunteers. This is always a hard one, especially for events that rely on contingents of hundreds of volunteers for their events and large staffs. So make sure that you're having meetings with the key players. If you are relying on a lot of volunteers, make sure that you have some designated players in specific roles who are managing those volunteers for you. So if you have like a cleanup manager volunteer who is, coordinating all of the efforts of your cleanup team, if it's a backstage production team, all of those different teams, just make sure that there's one person in charge so that they can lead the efforts in those areas, and so that you are not personally having to train everybody. We at Metro Parks are switching over to training videos versus mandatory training meetings, that it's been harder and harder to get people to show up on the Thursday before the event. So consider different things like that. On site, we have FAQ sheets for all of our volunteers that go in their pockets with every question that we've gotten over the course of the years of producing the event, and every question that has come up from staff or from police or fire that might need to be answered along the way. And it's just a quick hit sheet of all of those details. You could give every volunteer your 300-page event plan. There's one sitting down there that's in a 4-inch binder. But they're not going to read it. They're not going to understand it. So having those FAQs that they can put in their pocket, that's going to point them to the right direction. Where's the lost kids? Where's the lost and found? Where do I find water? All of those different smaller elements that you might not think are important is going to be what's important to the people who are attending your event. So put yourself in the mind and the shoes of somebody coming to your event for the first time and trying to navigate it, and all those different questions that you would have going to somebody else's event. Make sure everybody knows and understands at least the basics of your emergency action plans, your evacuation routes, the lost kids, fires, all of those things, what to do in those situations, weather emergencies, all of those different contingents, that they at least have a basic understanding, and then that those key people in those positions have a full understanding of what that action plan is, and know what their roles are and how to delegate down to their teams. Another thing just on volunteers to add, indemnification forms for your volunteers. Make sure they sign them. That'll help save you in the long run. That's a safety thing. Weather contingencies. I have a phobia of checking the weather and getting excited about sunny weather, superstition, if you will, before an event. But I'm always checking, just never excited about sunny weather. I always assume there'll be a hurricane or a tornado or something. But having contingencies for what's going to happen if you're planning on sunshine and you inevitably get rain in the Pacific Northwest, how does that change your event? What are the different things that you need to do in order to make your event continue on? Our shade tent, which was a mesh shade tent and an event, where 3 days before we were predicted to get half an inch of rain, turned into a solid top rain tent. So those different things, having good relationships with your rental companies and things like that, where you need to make those last minute pivots just based on weather. Having, knowing what you're going to do if lightning strikes at 25 miles out, at 15, at 10, at 5, what you do, what things you shut down, where you evacuate to, where you push people to, all of those different elements are things to think about. And then, what protocols are you going to implement when those things happen? Do fire and sanitation station, or first aid and sanitation stations. There are a couple of different things that you can do with first aid, and a couple of different resources that are out there. Tacoma Fire Department, their medics are available for you to pay to have on site to provide medics for your event. Red Cross used to have a thing called a FAST team. I think they are pretty much done in the Pacific Northwest, but a few of their people who used to work on them have formed other companies that support events with the, as we call them, boo-boos and sunscreen type medics, which is different than what Tacoma Fire Department would have. AMR is another one, Olympic Medical Service, those ambulatory services that are available. The Department of Health and Human Resources has the Medical Reserve Corps. It's another volunteer organization that you can ask to be at your event. And they're basically there to triage and to, help make the call whether or not, you need to call to have a medic response to transport somebody out. So a bunch of different levels of medical first aid services that you can have on your event, and kind of determine, like, how big is the event? What are the risks associated? Is there heat? Is there alcohol? Is there food? Like, all of those different elements kind of help shape the type of first aid amenities that you need to have on site. So walking through all of that. And then on the sanitation side, you can never have too many porta potties. And lock your porta potties at night unless you want to operate a tiny home village. And then there's a couple of things on hand washing stations. You can get those little pump hand wash stations from, United Site Services or Honey Bucket. Know that they only last about half the day and you can only refill them once. So look at other options. There's portable hand wash stations that you can get. There's other avenues that you can go down to provide hand washing services for the public. And so those are good things to look at. And then if your event is a multi-day event, you'll need to have wash stations for cleaning of all of the food vendor wares, unless you have food trucks that are all leaving at the end of every night and then coming back on site. 3-compartment sink, produce rinse sink, hand wash sink, all of those different elements need to go in there. The health department has great resources on what needs to be in those wash stations and what the requirements are. And Amanda Peters over the health department is a great resource for determining, what types of those sanitation needs you need. And that's all I really have. Yeah.
I'm just going to interrupt really quick because the City of Tacoma's Environmental Services Department also offers solid waste equipment at either reduced or no cost if you apply for the ES funding or the ES services program. So you could get it free.
We like free, Ashley. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ryan. That was amazing. And now we're going to head over to our very own Sean McBroom over here at the Tacoma Dome.
Well, hello, everybody. So I'll give you a little background about myself. I spent a little over 20 years in the United States Coast Guard. 17 of that was in maritime law enforcement, with a sprinkling of search and rescue missions thrown in every now and then. When I moved back to this area, I worked for TSA briefly, and then took a security supervisor and then security manager position at the Washington State Convention Center downtown Seattle. For those of you who are unfamiliar with that building, it's actually built over I-5 and one of the softest targets I've ever seen for some sort of a natural or massive natural disaster or mass casualty event. I'm going to start this presentation with the security measures, emergency preparedness and accessibility, and lost parent/child. Actually, if you could put up the ADA one, I'd appreciate that. Well, all right, so I'll start talking about disability accessibility. So fortunately, in the United States of America, we have something called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that outlines what we have to do as a venue and a community to make sure that people with disabilities are treated the same as everyone else. I'll start with the parking and drop-off zones. You have to have parking accessible near the entrance with spaces that are marked and wide enough to accommodate vans with lifts, as many people are not mobile without some other device to help them. The ADA outlines how big these spaces must be, how wide, and how long. And there has to be a safe, accessible route from the parking zone to the arena entrance. At least 50% of all public entrances must be accessible to people with disabilities. We have a lot of ramps at the Tacoma Dome. The ramps must have a slope of no more than 1 to 12 and have handrails. That means that every inch of vertical rise, the ramp length needs to be 12 inches. For egress, emergency exits have to be accessible with clear evacuation plans for people with disabilities, and staff needs to be trained to accommodate and to assist people with mobility issues. So while you're in the building, your accessible routes need to connect to all essential areas: the entrances, seatings, restrooms, concessions, and of course, emergency exits. Routes need to be at least 36 inches wide and provide stable, slip-resistant services. Now, this can be retrofitted after the fact. There's a lot of material that can be laid down that are slip-resistant. Hopefully your building has already had that factored in during the initial construction. Elevators or lifts need to be provided if you have more than one floor. Stairs should also have railings and contrasting striping for easy visibility for those folks that have some sort of disability. As I mentioned earlier, staff needs to be trained on ADA policies, how to assist people with disabilities, how to operate alternative listening devices, and manage accessible seating and parking for such folks. Emergency personnel should be aware of accessible routes and how to assist in emergencies. Now, that means that your EMS and law enforcement, if you hired them at your event, at your venue, they need to be aware of routes that the building has designated as emergency routes. Service animals. We recently had at 2 different venues, people that wanted to bring in their service cats. So just as a point of fact, only dogs and miniature horses can be service animals. Question, usually people will have some sort of a designation on the dog, a vest or something like that, designate him as a service animal. If they don't, they're not required to. And if they don't, there's really only 2 ways to determine if it is a service animal or just somebody's pet they want to take with them. You can ask if it is a service animal. And staff needs to be trained to do this politely, non-aggressively. If they say yes, it's a service animal, you can ask them, what service is it trained to provide? You don't have to, but that is the only other question you may ask somebody according to the ADA. Make sure that your service animals are accommodated. Provide areas for seating and a waste disposal area for those service animals. Now, just because it's a service animal doesn't mean it can do its business inside your building and you have to tolerate it. As far as being under control, service animals are required to be tethered or leashed unless the disability of the human precludes the use of such a device, and then they can be under voice command. But that would be, in my opinion, probably kind of rare. Your venue should communicate to the public. And all the related materials that you put out, whether it's email blast or a website, make sure you make people aware of the availability of accessible seating, the entrances, and ensure there's adequate signage outside the event directing guests to accessible entrances. we can move on, I think, Ashley, to the lost child one. Thank you. Oh, where to go? Well, I'll just start with it. So this is kind of near and dear to my heart, being a father and having, as I said, a little bit of search and rescue stuff over my career. I like to call it search and reunification. So, kids really get scared when they can't find their parent or guardian. So the first thing you need to do is if it's a parent coming to you with a lost child, get information from that parent about the child. Name is very important. This can help if somebody, God forbid, is trying to take the child away from the venue, perhaps a estranged spouse or something like that. Asking a kid that's leaving the venue, hey Ryan, how are you today? Or you can identify that child by name. You need to know how old they are, what they're wearing, what they look like. Are there any special identifying features? Do they have, the glow in the dark tennis shoes or something like that? Where was the child last seen? Was the child frustrated or angry, run away from you because it couldn't get what it wanted or was upset? Something like that. That happens as parents. We all know that children have minds of their own. They can do unpredictable things. Make sure you get the contact information for the parent or guardian, because they're probably going to want to walk away from you and look the child themselves. So that's important to get that information from them. Let the parent or guardian know that we're going to handle the situation. Advise them to remain in one area. Perhaps if you have a lost and found area or a guest services desk, that's a good place to send them. Make sure that you use your radios discreetly, of course, as was mentioned earlier. Make sure that all security personnel, law enforcement, EMS have a good description of the child so they can start looking. Make sure that staff at entry and exit points and other high traffic areas are on the alert for the child. I can't overemphasize entry and exit. We don't want a child leaving the building unattended, and we certainly don't want someone that isn't the guardian to walk out of the building with a child. Staff should keep a watchful eye on all surrounding areas where a child might go. Restrooms, food courts. If there's a table set up with toys or other merchandise that might look enticing to a child, that's someplace we can look for. If you have good surveillance camera coverage, security in that area can start to look back at the cameras to find out where the child was according to the parent or guardian and where they might have gone from then. It's a pretty good resource to use. If the child is not located, at some point you've got to call law enforcement or Child Protective Services to take custody of the child. You can't keep that information, or sorry, this is with a found child, not a lost child. So a found child is treated pretty much the same as a lost child. You want to keep control of the child, use calming and reassuring tones to your voice and speech. Let the child know, hey, we're going to find your parent, we're going to find your uncle, we're going to find your aunt. But within a reasonable amount of time, if that does not occur, especially if people are starting to exit the building, say that the event is over, you need to turn the child over to CPS or law enforcement and not keep in the hands of contract security. I think I skipped. I think I have these out of order here.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. If someone comes up saying that, hey, that is my kid, you need to verify that. You need to make sure that the child's name is well known. If the child is there, they will probably recognize this person. If they don't, that certainly should be a red flag. Do not release the child to anyone until you verify that this is the proper person. This is the parent or guardian that the child came in the building with, so that they can leave with. And you can certainly request identification from that adult to make sure that it's such. And if you need to have a manager or someone from that management staff come and help you verify, that's also a good idea. Whether it's a lost found, whether it's a lost child or a found child, make sure there's an incident report. This is the only way to really going to be able to brief your staff or debrief your staff as to were the procedures followed correctly? What was the resolution? Did we do it in a timely manner? Without that report, you're kind of flying blind for the next event or next time this sort of thing happens. This is also, like I said, good way to make sure that everything was done correctly. And if not, it's a chance to retrain your staff or train them up a little better for a future event. All right. Well, I'm not going to go through the slides for the emergency preparedness because Frank covered a whole lot of them, and it would just be redundant. But I will talk about some of the things briefly from my point of view here at the Tacoma Dome. The Tacoma Dome is a pretty soft target. We don't yet have any fencing around the facility. There are some vehicle bollards on the sidewalks to prevent some sort of vehicle catastrophe. We do use law enforcement at every large event to control the ingress and egress routes to the dome. It's important that everyone understand in your building that emergency preparedness applies to everyone, not just the event staff, but all contractors, the event organizers, law enforcement, EMS personnel. It's everybody's job to make sure that we mitigate any kind of emergency and that we're prepared for some sort of an emergency. So constant training and discussions should occur before every event. When we get ready to host an event and we set up our perimeter of metal detectors before people enter the building, we go through with all the supervisors and search staff what they're looking for, what they should be aware of. We would like to establish a 200-foot perimeter away from the building where we can maybe see stuff coming. One of our big things is we have a clear bag policy, so we don't allow large bags into the building. So we put people out on the sidewalks to let folks know as they approach, hey, that's not going to be allowed in the building. We advise you take it back to your car. Or we do have lockers. Not every place has a locker for rent, but if you do, that's a good thing to tell them out there. People can be on the lookout. These people at the 200-foot perimeter mark can be on the lookout for suspicious activity. It's a broad term, obviously, but some people might look like they're casing a joint. Again, this is a subjective thing, but it doesn't hurt to make sure that people understand if they see something odd, not only do they say something about it, but if possible, they do something about it. Doing something about it could be you're at an entrance and you see something you don't like, you say something to your supervisor, and you close the door. See something, say something, and do something. You have to perform regular risk assessments for every event, knowing what type of event you're having. It was mentioned earlier that it could be a political event or some sort of cultural event, which could bring people that don't necessarily agree with the event organizers or the event VIPs or speakers. You need to establish different protocols for high-risk areas and identify those high-risk areas. Perhaps air intakes are a concern. Make sure that CCT coverage can view those areas. Make sure that if you have external power drops, that those areas are covered, not only with cameras, but with security personnel to prevent somebody from pressing the off button during the middle of your concert. Make sure that you're identifying ingress and egress routes, not just for the venue, but away from the venue, so that you can get people in and out efficiently and safely. Obviously, you need to coordinate with law enforcement personnel for that. You need to establish good communications with law enforcement, with EMS. They have to be on your radio frequency, or you have to exchange radio frequency or radios with them. We use a dispatcher at the Tacoma Dome for every large event, and that person is located at 24-hour security and dispatches all contract security personnel, cleanup staff, operations staff, and can communicate with law enforcement and fire in case something happens. So that's a really good person to have, and it has to be a strong person in that position, good communication skills. Otherwise, it becomes ineffective. If possible, for an event, you should use canines for explosive ordnance detection. Sometimes just walking the crowd with a dog can deter some folks who have ill intent. Let's see. I'm pretty confident that I've covered everything that Frank did, and not have too much overlap between what Frank said and what Ryan said. I know there is some.
We appreciate you, Sean. That was great. We have Ashley Young, who's going to talk about some of the resources that we have for you all today.
Thanks, Mishi, and thank you everyone for attending. We really appreciate this. As you can see, we have a group of incredibly passionate professionals, and safety is probably throughout all of our different organizations number one on our priorities for our various departments. And so as you can see, we get really into it, and we have a lot of information to share, and I really hope that this has been valuable for you folks today. We have provided, like with all of our other skill shops, a couple of resources for you to take home. We want to provide really valuable information, but we also want you to have actionable items that you can take the lead with in your own organization and your own event planning. On the left, you'll see the event safety and emergency plan template. Funny enough, it looks very surprisingly similar to the one in Seattle. And Frank and I had a great conversation about that this last week. You know, a lot of our event professionals do events not just within our own city, but they do events within several cities. And something that we're starting to understand as a challenge to event organizers is that every jurisdiction kind of has a different process and a different way that things look. So where we can, and as we make adjustments in today's day and age, we're trying to make these look a little bit more similar. So that way you're providing the same information. You're not having to recreate the wheel every single time you're creating an emergency plan for the jurisdiction you're operating in. So I totally copied City of Seattle, not even ashamed. I changed it up a little bit, and our department just looked at theirs and thought it's a really great template. So why would we have you do something completely different by any means? So you'll find the event safety and emergency plan template on the Tacoma Venues Events website, along with the checklist. We know planners love checklists. I like get my Monica Keller out, and I'm like, chicken, I feel really good when I'm planning events and I know that I'm accomplishing the tasks that I have. And so we also created a short checklist for you to incorporate into your emergency planning. If you scan the QR code, it'll take you directly to those links for you to download. I believe they're in Word documents. That way they're easily editable for you. If that's not the case and Word is not your jam, feel free to reach out to me at ayoung@tacomavenues.org, and I can give it to you in a PDF format. But please go to our page, rewatch this recording, share it with your friends. This will be published live or online, excuse me, for you to review and share out along with these resources and some of the other resources that our organizers provided with us today. And so I'll kick it back over to Dimishi, and I think it's Q&A time.
All right, we do have a resource page here. Frank's information is listed. Sergeant Jason Mills, who is not here today, but we have the amazing Lieutenant David Johnson and Sergeant Warren Miller filling in. But this is Jason Mills' contact information, and then we have the Community Emergency Response Team. There's an email address if you would like to reach out to them as well. And now we have time for Q&A. Do we have any questions out there?
Hi, Dimishi. We do have a question, and it'd probably be towards Frank, Frank's here, yes. It says for not an event, but our organization recently had a domestic terrorism threat made. Do you have guidance around communications, best practices, templates, etc. for situations like this? Leadership had concerns about word, quote unquote, getting out, mitigating panic, retaining reputation, etc. So
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Good question. That's something that if it is a threat, this is something that we're always looking, at communications that are out there, whether they're social media posts or there's something, left on a voicemail box or emailed in. If it looks like it is a threat, and what's the definition of a threat? Something that makes somebody uncomfortable, they have concerns. That's something to get law enforcement involved in. Lieutenant talked about the Fusion Center, and I know, events up in Seattle. We basically have an open line with the Fusion Center during any of the large scale Seattle events. And, we're essentially passing that information to them. They're doing a threats assessment on it and so forth. It's something that communication is important, and you don't want to have external communication about this threat until it's validated. It's just like a bomb threat. You don't necessarily put that information out until it's been validated that there's a level of concern. At that point, again, follow the lead from law enforcement or from emergency management on the direction to take of that. The important thing is communication internally of something like that. And again, we faced a situation like that this past summer up in a Seattle event, to where we had a occurrence happen at a similar event a week before the event that we were involved in. And believe me, a lot of meetings during that intervening time with our board of directors, with law enforcement, with emergency management, both city, state, and federal, to look at that. We came up with a plan and were able to successfully mitigate anything happening and still have the event go on. It did require some enhancing of security and changing of security plans and things like that. So again, just a good, concise, planned approach. And again, go to the folks that can validate that information. Go to law enforcement. They're the experts at how to plan for that and mitigate for that. Or your emergency management for your jurisdiction. They also have tools and training and so forth that can assist with that. Hopefully that answered it. That's a really complex question, and it's kind of like you don't necessarily know what action you're going to take until you're faced with it, because there's so many variables. And in today's world, in the security and law enforcement world, we're constantly seeing these advisories that come out, about this extremist group and this event that happened and so forth. And again, just rely on the intel folks, I think, to help validate that. One thing I will mention, this is kind of an aside to this, but probably, it's going to brought this up earlier, is the Washington State Fusion Center publishes a monthly recap of upcoming special events. Communicate that with them ahead of time. They'll list your event in that. They'll run whatever resources they'll run. If your event meets a certain criteria, and it's usually almost any event will, they'll construct what's called a CETA, a Special Event Threats Assessment, which is basically custom designed for your event. And that'll be published to you. All their documents, for the most part, are law enforcement protected. They consider private security partners, event organizers, people with that kind of infrastructure responsibility to be in the know for those read-ins. So again, utilize that as a resource, and they can be found online, Washington State Fusion Center, or their mailbox is intake at wsfc.wa.gov. Okay, hopefully that answered the question. Back to you.
I'll just chime in a little bit to kind of piggyback on what Frank said, because his variables are like your response is going to be different because you just never know what the actual emergency is. So what you can have really tight is your internal response. Know exactly who's going to be a part of that decision making, how to get a hold of them quickly and efficiently, and how to get you all together. So for your bigger events or even your smaller ones, establishing a command center is really important. That way, if there's an emergency response, you can quickly say, so and so, so and so, and so and so, report to your emergency command center, and then they come there immediately, and then you can start to mitigate those problems together quickly.
Thank you, Ashley. Gerald, do we have anything else in the chat?
No, that was pretty much it.
No, there's one
Okay.
more that came in while Frank was talking.
Oh, here. Yes. Sorry. Says hi there. I believe it was Frank who I've mentioned. I know you mentioned about Husky Stadium distributes a pocketbook of information for workers at an event. I believe you said photos of important people to know. What else does that include? Anything you can think that can be included to make that even better? Thanks.
Sure, I can kind of address that, and I don't have one sitting here in my office, or I'd put it up on the screen. It's a like I say, a small book. It looks, this is not it, but it looks something like this. Well, the camera doesn't like that. There you go. Little notebook, and basically what it has is their emergency procedures, from security threats, what to do if there's a stadium evacuation, what to do when weather chimes in, what to do. It's got all the important phone numbers. Husky Stadium does use a command center or an EOC that stood up in one of the upper levels. How to get a hold of the responsible parties that are there, and then they do put some information in there, such as not only who the leaders are, leadership, like the university president, the athletic director. They put a photo in, so again, you recognize that person. And again, it's probably about the size of this little notebook that I displayed. And something we do at Seafair events, we have what's called a trifold that we hand out to our staff and volunteers. And it's really an 8x14 page. It folds up, 3 ways and becomes a pocket guide. And in that, it has a brief schedule of events for that day. It has emergency procedures. We put in there information to gather in case of an emergency. We put lost child, found child data in there, radio frequencies, and we put a map of the event site. Again, most of those are outdoor events. And one of the things that we found is very useful in those is, rather than naming something, and events are great about this, is the north entrance, the west entrance, or near the Piggly Wiggly tent. People don't know that. So we use a grid, letters, cross, stop numbers down the side. So again, knowing where you are to report an emergency, you've got this map that somebody can look at. And you can say you're in Bravo 7. That's a lot easier to go to than having to go look up which way's north, or look up, the name of that particular vendor. So those are probably 2 examples. The Husky Stadium one is probably about 35 pages. Again, printed both sides, a little pocket thing. The one we produce is, everything you can fit in, a legal size sheet of paper that you then fold up into, 3, so it fits in the pocket. And we print one of those up daily. We also do an incident action plan, an IAP for each day. That goes out to leadership and to leaders and so forth, which is a lot more comprehensive document. We make that available electronically, since nobody wants to carry around a 30-page document. If you do, they're not going to look at it. So we'll send that out to folks, and that has everybody's phone numbers, not just within our organization, but phone numbers across, who's the police commander, who's the fire commander, what's the phone number at the city EOC, who's in charge of what. It has weather in it, reporting things. So all different, types of things that can be furnished. And again, it goes to what I think we've all said here today, is having that lines of communication, that more information out there is, so staff and everyone can make, good decisions. Back to you, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Frank. I just wanted to thank everyone for attending. Safety is our #1 priority. And so we greatly appreciate all of you for attending, and to our panelists as well. Thank you so much for participating and sharing your expertise and insight. Once again, these resources will be available on the Tacoma Venue and Events website, and we look forward to creating another skill shop for all of you. A survey will be sent out, so please fill that out. Give us some insight on what you would like us to present on, and we look forward to another successful skill shop in the new year.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe out there.
Bye, guys. Thank you.